BraveHeart, the critically acclaimed epic about the life of Scottish freedom fighter William Wallace. It won a whole bunch of Academy Awards, including the coveted Best Picture Award. And somehow it's less accurate than Zack Snyder's comic book movie. Hello everybody and welcome to History Abridged. It's history, just shorter. Today we're going to be talking about the movie BraveHeart and analyzing how accurate, or in this case inaccurate, it is. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention that BraveHeart's more based on the epic poem by Blind Harry the Minstrel than it is, the actual historical events. But this isn't about fairness. This is about historical accuracy. First off, William Wallace was not a commoner. He was actually a member of a lesser noble family. In the movie, he does own some land after his father is killed, but it never actually says he's a noble, and owning land doesn't actually make you a noble, so, there. At the beginning of the movie, we're told that Edward I invited all the Scottish nobles to negotiate terms of surrender and had them all hung. That never happened. One, because Edward I was not king when William Wallace was a child. Alexander III was, and his reign was associated with peace and stability. Edward II did actually marry Princess Isabella of France, but that wasn't until he was king, several years after William Wallace's death. Wallace does organize an attack that ends with the assassination of the Sheriff of Lanark, but whether or not it was because of his wife's murder is unclear. There's actually not a whole lot of evidence to suggest that Wallace even had a wife. The reason Wallace's wife is murdered in the movie is because she tried to fight off a soldier who tried to claim the right of prima nocta. Fun fact, prima nocta never actually existed. It's a complete myth. After killing the sheriff, Wallace does actually raid a town called Scone. During that raid, the local Justicar did manage to escape. Unlike its cinematic depiction where the man from the beginning gets to brutally murder the lord who raped his wife. To the movie's credit, it does portray William Wallace's two most famous battles, one of which is the Battle of Stirling Bridge. But, in the movie, there's a distinct lack of bridge. It's in the name, Mel. It's in the name! Also, Wallace did not actually command that battle alone. He commanded it alongside another Scottish freedom fighter named Andrew Moray, who was, unfortunately, mortally wounded during the fighting. Both of them were named the Guardians of Scotland. An invasion into England did in fact happen, and Wallace did in fact lead it. However, they didn't get even close to York, let alone sack it and kill the Lord. In the movie, they make a point to say William Wallace doesn't kill anybody he doesn't have to. However, that is not true. William Wallace killed anybody and everybody who was even mildly in his way. That included children. Soon after, Edward I did in fact lead a second invasion into Scotland, which eventually led to the Battle of Falkirk. However, there were no actual Irishmen, so that cute exchange where they charge at each other and shake hands, the cavalry actually did abandon the Battle of Falkirk. However, it wasn't because Edward I paid them off. It was more like they started charging, saw how many Englishmen there were, and just kind of noped out of there. In the movie, Wallace loses the battle mostly because the important people that he was depending on betrayed him or just left. However, in reality, he actually lost mostly because of a technological disadvantage. The English had developed longbows, which could deal a massive amount of damage from far outside the Scottish archer's range. From this point to Wallace's execution, there's almost no semblance of reality. After the Battle of Falkirk, historical records are kind of vague, but what we do know is William Wallace resigned his guardianship of Scotland, mostly because the Battle of Falkirk ruined his military reputation. There are records saying that he went to France, or even as far as Rome, trying to find support for the Scottish rebellion. Unfortunately, he eventually returned empty-handed. Also, William Wallace most likely did not have an affair with Princess Isabella. She was in France when all this was happening, and also she was 3 years old. After about 4 or 5 years, William Wallace eventually returned to Scotland and participated in a bunch of raids and whatnot. About a year after he returned, he was captured and executed. And that execution in the movie was pretty brutal, right? Well, guess what? In real life it was worse, like way worse. So if you don't want to hear about it, just click here to skip. So first, he was stripped naked, and he was tied to the back of a horse. Then he was dragged through town, where they took him to the execution block, where they hung him till he was almost dead, chopped off his genitals, ripped out his guts, burned them in front of him, and then finally beheaded him. His head was placed on a spike on London Bridge, and his limbs scattered throughout the country. After his rather gruesome execution, the Scots rally behind his martyrdom, fight the English tooth and nail until they eventually win their freedom. Right! Except, they're still a part of the UK today. And Wallace fought in the first Scottish Rebellion, to which there was in fact a sequel, BraveHeart, Mel Gibson's American Revolution fantasy before his actual American Revolution fantasy. It's known as one of the least accurate movies in cinematic history, and for good reason. The only thing it really has in common with the actual story is a couple events and names. So that's all for today, guys. Thanks for watching, and once again, this was History Abridged.